Hi, Peter here from Symbiotic Future with Dr. Nicolene, and it is a Saturday evening, and it's the 2 sessions a week that we put on for the Symbiotic Future community, and we want to take the most of this time that we're spending to bring content, to bring value towards everyone, and so that's why Dr. Nicolene and I are here to share in a conversation and talk about all of these amazing educational things that we live, love, and breathe. So, yeah.
Hi. So, yeah, I mean, this is really, really cool. And I think what makes it just the best is that it is a Saturday. And being able to jump on a call and just talk about something that's super, super present for me at the moment. Um, so I think it's always important to timestamp and date stamp um, where we are in this whole evolution of life. And it is August again, right? And it's the 26th of August, 2023. And I think it's a day to remember. So this afternoon, I went onto the Symbiotic Future app on the school app, or the Symbiotic Future network on the school app. And I had these aha moments, and I kind of just have to show. These were my aha moments. And I don't know, my mind just went into so many places of possibility because I really thought about what is it that I want to do in the community? Why would I join this Symbiotic Future community? And what is it that I want to be spending my time on? And I was hoping, I know that this is kind of a check-in call slot. I was hoping to share where my thinking has gone in terms of my purpose and my form and my function within this community.
Yeah, well, that's one of the big things that, community doesn't just have one voice. I remember going
Mm.
to a place in Australia called Old Sydney Town, and it's when the
Mhm.
town crier would ring the big bell and shout out, and everything's happening at one, and everybody would come. And those days are kind of well and truly over. So this is very much about sharing, and I'm really glad that you can share. And I want us to be able to
Mm.
share a lot more because there's a lot that we have to offer in terms of starting conversations, sparking ideas, and leading the way. Um, because I mean, when I look at the community and the 32 people that are there at the moment, and I know, and the incredibly valuable work and
Mm.
projects that people are actually working on. So I want to be able to, you know, set the example for openness and set the example for sharing in dialogue and communication. And when I see
Mm.
all of those little headings and subheadings, and I know they go very very deep and wide, and that's really kind of how we do things. So I'd like you to be able to share those things freely.
Mm. You know, I've been part of the Symbiotic Future Network for how long now? How long have you been setting this up? It's a month? Can we say it's about a month now?
Yeah, I think give or take, yes.
Yeah, just about a month. So within this month, um, I mean, it's been really interesting for me to sit with this kind of gift in my lap, and I was really sitting with it and saying to myself, I get it, but I don't feel it yet. Like I understand it conceptually, but how do I fully like immerse myself and how do I find my sense of place within that? And I think there can be sense of place within this community by sharing, by observing, by asking, by taking, by giving back. There's so many ways that people can kind of like engage and be part of this community. And yeah, I think just sitting with this intention over a sustained period of time, going in and out of the conscious educator meetings as well, brought me to this. Ah, this is something that I would love to share with other people and with other not only conscious educators, but conscious leaders, conscious parents, just conscious designers, conscious business people, just everybody, because there's just so much in our design at Open Flow and even in my own personal brand that can just resonate at such a higher level with others. And yeah, so I think I must just highlight some of the main headings that
Yeah,
that I really thought. And I'm just going to show it one more time, because there's these pink main headings, and I actually took a photo of this, and I've already like added it to the community through the app, because I just didn't know how to share, and I was just excited to share about it, and then thinking about, oh, having a conversation about it is even more cool.
well, just on that,
Did
I
you?
think that's a
Yeah.
really, really important point because it's a very simplistic app, yeah, but it
Mm,
is familiarizing yourself with that, and
mm,
these are not natural ways to communicate for human beings. So in order to move into a community element online, then
mm,
there's also the technical factors of that too. So you highlight some really, really good points because I mean you and I get to work together just about every single day on a variety of things.
mm,
But and the amount of things that I've shared recently in terms of the university visits and like really wanting to share because I really do feel a representation on behalf of all of us and what this network can really stand for. But I also understand that there's value in doing some initial tutorials and things on enabling people to
mm,
learn how to use it and to feel free to do that. So
mm,
when I saw your things come through today, thick and fast, I was like, yeah, that's so cool. And I'm so glad that we can talk about it and share about those things now.
mm. Just on that as well, something that was really, really cool in realizing that engaging in the community, even whether it's like giving it a like or making a comment or saying, oh, I really like that, or well, this resonates, but I kind of want it like this, or I'm curious about how that would look like in this setting, or have you thought about this? Like there can be those two parts within the community. So for
Mm,
myself, I know that I am not as much a consumer as I am a designer. So for me, I don't get that much out of the community when I have to consume something from the community.
mhm,
But as soon as somebody asks for like, hey, what do you think about this? Like, can you maybe, throw some ideas out, or do you have like some sort of structure or program or a product or like something? Do you have a design around this? Or what are your
mm,
thoughts about designing around this? Then I feel super activated and I feel super motivated to do something. So it's also, I think, understanding what I really like and what I really want from the community. And again, just holding these intentions um, with time and arriving to this point of where it feels really really good for me.
mm,
I think that's exciting, and I'm excited to see what that will be for everybody
mm,
in the community. So
mm.
just before I get into my main headings, can you just like tell me again what are the headings that are currently in the community? Like I know one of them is like like introduce yourself, start here, and what are some of the other um, categories that are currently within the community?
Yeah, so I've basically set them up under um, one, two, just to give it a number two, right? Three,
Mm-hmm,
four, five, six different elements. And
mm-hmm,
one is share you with us. So that's basically like pretty self-explanatory. Whatever comes up for you there. There's also a pinned message there. There's two pinned messages on the main board, and one is just a video that I released the other day about cultivating conscious education, and the second one is the start here, and that's got like basically everyone that's come in there has put a lot about them there, which is really awesome because that's one central depository where you can go in and you can actually look through and say, okay, who's this person and what do they do and what do they do? Actual tabs, let's say, there's share you with us, community guidelines, which is really just a one kind of message about what we are, what we will be, and what we're not, which I
mm-hmm,
think is always important to have like a little message there to keep everyone kind of in check, if you know what I mean. And the next is just
mm-hmm,
a general discussion. So that is whatever comes up for you. It can be as simple as just putting, hey, this is what's happening in my class today. Hey, this is what happened with my clients today. Hey, this is what I'm working on. And that's where, that's just full freedom there. Meetups is something where I put such as the sessions today and just making myself available. That can be something where if other people want to make themselves available for their work, that can be scheduled in through the app too. And so meetups is like, hey, we're meeting up online every new moon. There's 2 sessions a week, but also here in Bali, we can have physical meetups and we can put that on there. Celebrations is another one. And I've been putting a few things up there about celebrating with the universities. And I think Noah may have put something up about celebrating the entrepreneurial instances that he was involved in up there in America and his work. And that's so cool because we want to celebrate our work. Quite often when we work in silos, we have no one to share the depth and breadth of what that actually means. So that's what the celebrations is for. And then lastly, ideas and suggestions. And that's where I'm so open in terms of the architecture and the design. I don't want to control any of that. I've just kind of kickstarted it and catalyzed it. And now I see that you've got into all those cool spaces, which makes me very excited. And what is so cool about that is in being such an agile, flexible, malleable system, all of that can change so fast. It really can change like so fast. So whatever that idea and suggestion is, that can be implemented straight away, or it can be talked about at the next gathering or the next Tuesday or Saturday session. So I've really tried to set those little simplistic foundations. Otherwise, there's just like empty internet space, and we're just floating around in ones and zeros in cyberspace. So just setting the foundations with those 6 different areas there.
Well, again, I get so excited because a lot of the time, when I talk to people or when I explain ideas, and even when I, make it as simple as possible, people still kind of say, I don't get it. And for me, especially as an educational designer, a thought leader, a scientist, like just a passionate human being about education, it can be sometimes a very numbing and frustrating process for me. And kind of working through myself, which I've also listed in the celebrations, and then merging it with an awakening into what I feel gives me a lot of purpose and which I know gives me a lot of purpose. Yeah, this whole process has been really, really cool. So where my thoughts went this afternoon was to, okay, so on the app, I would love to have a main heading that says open flow. And what that would really present is like, what is open flow? How do we do open flow? Why do we do open flow? I was really, really thinking about showing some old photos and some history and just the process of how we found this whole concept. And, I think back of a time when there was just nothing, absolutely nothing. Yesterday, I saw a photo of my kids sleeping like in the building rubble and under the stars, and there was like a little candle because they were so curious and wanting to explore there. And I saw just the skeleton of the Joglo, which is our main building, and I thought, oh, come on, who doesn't want to celebrate your heritage, right? Because now we're kind of like backtracking, and I mean, you always talk about the song lines, and I know song lines can be very, very old, but open flow has its own song line, and it's intertwined with like the land and the people and the process. And what really brings me alive is sometimes when I look at these photos, I see people who aren't here anymore.
Yeah.
Like there are some of the elders from the community that when we walk through the photos, we're like, wow, yeah, time really does its thing, So there's just so much to be talking about and sharing in our process. And I know, schools like Akasha in South Africa, they're going through such a beautiful process of like being just stuck in the mud and just like trenching through it. And I know like whether it's Noah with Idori and whether it's like whoever with whatever, Rasa Bali, and just all of these people, Gian with the Women's Earth Alliance. Like I can even name the people one by one. Everybody has kind of their story. So I thought about open flow, that being an archetypal example of just telling the story of where your passion was born for whatever it is that you're doing, and what does that look like. And I think when people start sharing in that space, we will find interesting overlap. We will find interesting, differences and just all of that. But then I kind of went further and I said, okay, so that's kind of bringing the past into the present. And concurrently with that, under this open flow kind of storytelling, we're not dead, luckily. We're evolving. And there's like everyday stuff happening. So talking about like the design, the 7 cycles, the negotiables, the non-negotiables, what does it, I really want to highlight a daily activity with a photo and like how do these projects come together? I want to upload one of our portfolio examples. I want to talk about our bartering model of finance. Like we don't have all parents paying the same amount of school fees, learning center fees, school fees.
Yeah.
We don't have all families paying in a traditional monetary value, right? We have people that we barter with for their skills and services. So there's in that, and that's just one tab. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So there's 11, 12. There were 12 that I thought I really, really think can be so epic. And it's not creating any content for it. It's literally things that are happening right now. So that was the first one that I kind of just briefly jotted down. I know that there's a lot, and this is kind of why I'm also inviting the community to say, well, what is it about open flow or about a startup or about this like story? What is it that you are curious about? And we can talk specifically to that and create around that. So then, I don't know, should I pause there or do you want me to go to the next one?
Well, one thing that kind of comes up for me is that we've always said that these fundamental principles within open flow, because it's not a school and it's not just a learning center, there's a whole conscious design around it, and there's conscious evolution, and it's looking at the next 10, 15, 20 different steps. And there's the inclusive element, and then it really is. I gave a presentation this morning to, I think it's called World Systems Solutions, and it's a group of people from around the world. There was about 27 people from around the world, from I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 different regions around the world, multiple different time zones. And I talked about open flow, and I talked about what it represented in the Symbiotic Future Network. And I talked about the Symbiotic Future Network as it is, with the 32 people that are on there, because I've had individual conversations with all of these people that you mentioned, and I can name them one by one. And that is worth celebrating. So I know in celebrating and sharing what open flow has to offer in these evolving elements, the daily activities, all of that is real operational guidance too. That's open source information. That's the living anthropology. That's the visualization that you can get, and you can take as if you're starting up another school, or if you're working with bamboo and eco communities, if you're doing not-for-profit work, all of that all of a sudden goes, oh, that's cool. That's a simple idea that I can implement over here. Even to the very small point of saying, you know what, I've had a really, really tough day, but I'm just constantly being fed. I can go to this source and I can be fed real work that's happening every single day, because there is a reason why these group of people have come together so early. There's a gravitational pull because we're operating at the same or similar kind of vibration level through education and conscious educators and design and all of these areas, because it's so hard to find that centralized in one place. It's very, very dispersed in other realms. But naturally, that's why the interdependency is so beautiful, because people are coming in independently. And that's how it needs to be, how it should be. That's the natural diversity of a symbiotic relationship, a mutual symbiosis. But yes, we need to be able to have these common sharings that our natural intelligence will tell us that we can apply that in various ways within our daily operations, business, clients, work, proposals, all of those different areas.
Well, You know, what becomes really interesting for me in this conversation is that, you know, we say that it takes a village to raise a child, right? So it takes more than one perspective to kind of tell the story, to influence the story, to nurture the story. And my biggest wish would be that people get onto Symbiotic Future, and especially, you know, startups that are pushing alternative, whether it's like finance or entrepreneurship or education, can take this story and use it as a prototype example to say to people like, well, this is how it's working somewhere else. And for them to take a part of this story and say, well, I'm going to implement 1% of this because it's based on a trialed and tested model that is actually constantly evolving. It's constantly in movement, and it's constantly responding to its environment. So that really excites me because this is part of the village effect. When all of these ideas come together, and all of a sudden, you know, especially when you have, let's specifically talk about a school or a learning center, when you have a lot of external pressure because of the traditional system, and people find it hard to believe, or they find it hard to kind of grasp what it is that you're trying to say, this becomes that solid, or at least one of the solid reference points to be used and to be integrated into your own place-based model, because that's what we believe in. We believe in place and place-based and that whole philosophy. So I want to jump to number 2, if that's okay.
Before you go there, just one
Sure.
quick thing is that, you know, you mentioned take there twice. I heard the word take there twice, and I think, yes, take, that's fine. But also in return, in this symbiotic fashion, is why I've really tried to have these conversations. I want to have more conversations with community members to assist in that communication process, because it's not all that complex. In our minds, with how we see social media and communication and video and call and editing and all of that, it's all very, very simple. In my experience, it's very simple. And a conversation of 20, 30 minutes can be so incredibly potent to capture. And what that is for the message of your own work, what that is for bringing value to the community in terms of perspective and insights is, you know, you can't put a monetary value to that. So that's something that, you know, even this conversation in capturing this brings value in a particular way, which is, you know, a beautiful gesture of giving and also receiving. So yeah, I know you've got lots, so please go on.
Well, just pausing because I think you're really highlighting a big blind spot that I have, both personally and professionally, and that is my willingness to give, and sometimes overextending and giving. And I think it is key to say that can lead to burnout. And that's why when you do it in an individual kind of isolated fashion, that does lead to burnout. And I think the beauty of then being in a community where the community might take the concept or the principle, but they give back in their way, whether it's through conversation or through engagement, because I know for me that really fuels me. It really fuels me when people say that worked, or I'm almost there, just like help me just tweak this part. Like, how do we kind of, like, what am I seeing that you're not seeing, and what are you seeing that I'm not seeing? So that's kind of what is really important, and this excites me because there's a community now. It's not for me just to give to the world and at the end feel like where are the people that at least say that worked, right? I just want to hear that it was functional or not. And that kind of makes me think as well, I think it will be so great. You always say it will be fantastic to take a conceptual lens, right? The 8 conceptual lenses, and say, okay, so for example, for open flow, like what is the form? What is the function of open flow? What is its responsibility? What is the causation of open flow within the educational realm, within a community realm, within culture, within place, within society, and of course, my most exciting in industry. Like, what is the causation of having something like open flow as a fully functioning entity, a learning center, and like, what is the form of that? And going through all of those concepts can be very interesting and very grounding, because when you do approach what it is that you're communicating, like what we're talking about here now, in a very kind of like open yet structured way, I do think you honor the beauty of nature and the beauty of networks and the beauty of adaptability and all of that. So I think that's really something that I'm taking out of even this conversation, because as we're talking, I'm even making notes and saying, I need to talk through things. That really helps me. So this community is really valuable because it helps me ground my conceptual thinking. So number 2 is called future food. And I mean, we work so much with the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, all 17 of them. And we work so closely, like everything in our design involves the Inner Development Goals, the IDGs. And with Future Food, it's been such a beautiful process and story on how and why we started Future Food, and how it's really responding very, very clearly to zero hunger, and also how it enables, especially at a local level, to kind of communicate what quality education can be through culture and through place. So my thoughts there were to literally bring in a weekly recipe. So some things are daily, like I've mentioned in the open flow. Like I would love to share a daily, just a photo of whether it's kids down at the river or in the makerspace or in science or whatever. It's so diverse. But then with Future Food, to really catalyze one recipe per week, because it's super wild what these kids are doing. I mean, sometimes they make ethanol with ice cream, and they make mochi and they light it on fire and they have like flaming ice cream, or they make sweet potato donuts, or they just really do things. They recently, the kids are harvesting berries, which are very seasonal, and it's happening right now. They're harvesting these berries from the kupundung tree, which is a very sacred tree, and it has a red, it's very green on the outside, and then it has a red berry and kind of like a jelly type of flesh on the inside. But the redness of the seed on the inside is like a potent natural dye. It's so red. But they're making jam out of these berries, and these are our transition group kids who are from about 3 to 5-year-olds, collecting all of these berries alongside this super wild river, and alongside another child who initiated this jam making. They are like co-creating this. So that, for example, is very, very interesting. And then when you go into like, what is that tree? Why are they making it? Why is the tree sacred? Where does this all fit into the bigger picture? Because constantly we want to be having that living systems view of everything that we're doing. Everything is connected to industry, to education, to their personal experiences, their closeness to nature. I mean, I can go on and on and on and make the links because it's so exponential and it's infinite. It's really, really infinite. But bringing that very much systems view to a very concrete example, and in this case, under Future Food, through a recipe, is valuable. And then systematically saying, what does this address within the global agenda of the SDGs and the IDGs? Because when we ground ourselves and when we ground our community in understanding the simplicity of the complexity, that becomes valuable because it becomes something you can scale. Yeah, so really taking also the conceptual lens on Future Food. Let's just take causation again. Like, I don't know, causation really comes up for me at the moment. So what is the cause and effect of harvesting those berries? And what is the cause and effect of actually seed saving those berries? And what is the cause and effect, of deforestation? Like, what's the form and the function not only within the environment, but also within culture and religion, if that tree has to be removed. Because, I mean, many people know this is the big debate at the moment. Like, do we give up land or do we conserve land? So that's also part of our whole conservation issue, and approach to hopefully bringing that awareness. So that's number 2. Just kind of pace me if you think if it's too much or something. But I get so excited because I think there's a lot in here.
Well, it's also the fact that there is a lot there. And then when we look at that and we say there's incredibly value in all of that, because what you've just detailed there from a superficial point of view of how people look at education is that, okay, so the kids make a recipe, that's nice. Okay, so they cook, that's great. Kids need to cook. So you need to actually extrapolate that. You need to pull that apart you need to make it somewhat complex so that people see how in the actual observation, how simple what they're actually seeing these children do is actually, approaching and, let's say, addressing such significant, complex educational and pedagogical, let's say, outcomes. And that's really, really a whole different view on education. That is a conscious education. That is a conscious educator who's able to look at this, but to be able to sit in the moment and also in the reflective moment and be able to say, wow, I really did enable that space. I really did listen to the voices of the children. I really did pose this question seeking a genuine curiosity, not a question to kind of cage them in somehow and get a desired outcome, but really pose the question to enable this divergent thinking and natural intelligence to come through children, through their bodies, into their movements and their communication and all of those cool little ideas they have, which are so special, so special. And it's not just cooking. Don't tell me it's just cooking. They're not just making a recipe. There's a whole flow of play and interplay which is happening, and a very, 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 a very in tune with the natural intelligence of the land and also the people who move upon the land.
Well, I mean, if you really think about it, it comes down to how are we treating the work that we're doing, right? Like, how much do we really value the work that we're doing? And how much do we value ourselves in these processes of how we're doing things? And something else that's really been coming up a lot, even projecting into the future and looking at various conferences coming up, local wisdom, elders, indigenous people, these are all coming up so strongly within the world agenda. And there's a whole movement happening in acknowledging that the elders, they hold a wisdom. So something like this tree, that is a sacred tree, the Kapundung tree, you're not going to go onto Google. You're not going to go onto AI and ask about this tree, this particular tree. I'm talking about this tree that's in its particular space at this river in this community. You will go to the elders, to those that are still available, right? Those who are not extinct yet. You know, I said to somebody the other day, isn't it fascinating that every day you work among an extinct species? Because each and every one of us, once we die, we're extinct, right?
Yeah.
So it's really fascinating to think about it in this way. And when I do think about the local people, and especially because we have so many international children coming to the learning center, these interactions, they are building the pathways for relationships and for communication and for empathy and understanding and trust and all of this, which people will be debating in about 98 days time in Dubai at COP28. People will still sit around tables. They will still try to negotiate whether they will be removing indigenous people from land, whether it's worth keeping people on land. And then you'll jump about 3 months further into January to the World Environmental Conference and Education Conference that'll be happening in Dubai. And I think it's theme number 10 on their agenda is all about indigenous people and local wisdom. And there's a big ask in terms of what are we missing within this whole search for a sustainable, regenerative future? Like, how is it that we are searching for something that actually did work in the past? So people are kind of going back and saying, okay, so what is keeping us from acknowledging that? Is it our egos? Is it the money, the whole economic? Like, what is that? Vulnerability?
It's a good question. Just last night we had a conversation with someone in India, and I was having this imagination of ourselves being future ancient people.
I love that.
So I don't know what's going to happen to the earth in 1,000 years, in 100 years, in 1 year. But once upon a time, we referred to people of those ancient ages with this ancient wisdom. And it's kind of like, well, does that ever go away? Does the land ever relinquish that? Does the dreaming, do the songlines, does the kapundum tree, does culture, does, symbolic practices which have an inherent relationship with land and the cosmic cycles of moon and planetary alignments, does that ever forget? We might forget. Actually, we might be so focused on our very, very, very finite period of time upon this earth. What if we take that imagination of, yes, in my role every single day as a human being within humanity at open flow, and if I take on my future ancient person responsibility and I say, yes, this is the most important thing, and then I say, well, actually, is it so important to cast that sole responsibility of communication upon children to the world? Or do I have a huge responsibility to speak that forth? Do I have a huge responsibility to enable our Indonesian team to speak that forth on behalf of their cultural identity and their ancestors? Do I have a role as a human within a world society to speak on behalf of people and places that don't have voices, that cannot have a platform?
This is really interesting because in my experience working with children all my life, and I've worked at so many interesting schools and some being seen as quite progressive within the environmental sector, something that always came to the forefront is adults not being ready to speak, therefore withholding children of their voices. So, there's one thing to say, okay, well, maybe it's not to like bring all of this as a big sort of burden, which you kind of see within the world of sustainability. And I know we're kind of taking a detour, but this is really important to kind of touch on. When we bring this whole notion of sustainability and cleaning up the world and cleaning the rivers and cleaning the oceans and putting all of that on the kids, right? As you have to do this, otherwise you don't care, which is more like, I'm telling you, you have to do this.
Yeah.
Where kids then kind of say, well, why are you telling me to do this? Because I didn't make the mess. As opposed to when you involve children through their own willingness, through their own immersion, through their own natural curiosity, and then opening up space and saying, so how would you like to communicate this? Is it that you are making the jam and just passing it on to the next person? And that person asks, what jam is this? Is it strawberry jam? No. Is it apple jam? I don't even, do you make jam from apples? I don't even know.
We can.
And getting to that point of deciphering So I'm thinking through the eyes of 3 and 5-year-olds at the moment, and
Mhm.
saying, well, that in itself is enabling, right? Children to communicate something that
Mhm.
people would say, what is that tree? Like, what is a kapundung tree? I didn't even know what that was, right?
Mm.
I didn't
Mm.
even know. I've seen this tree before. So there's something about that where adults kind of, they just need to move faster past their kind of, I don't know what you would call it, but like getting through these membranes that are thicker
Mhm.
within adults, and they become thick over time. And those membranes, in terms of communication, are not so thick within children. They're
Mm.
still very, very, very thin, beautiful membranes where
Mm.
it's very fast for kids to move through whatever it is. And kids naturally, innately want to communicate. They
Mm.
want to share. They want to show you. They want to tell you. They want to involve you. So there's something about that for me. But I
Mm.
won't go into that a lot.
No, I think it's an interesting divergence, and this is a more conscious way of looking at life, really, not just
Mm,
education, because education is an extension of life. It's a manifestation of life. It's an
mm,
expression of life. So in creating something like OpenFlow, we create this time-space capsule, which has a
mm,
very, very potent focus upon the very, very small things that you would skip over in other places. Why? Because
mm.
there's a collective focus consistently in those areas. Therefore, the
Yeah.
dialogue with children becomes that much richer. A small
Mm,
remark is actually a validation of all of these things. And that's the real beauty of being able to live and breathe through this process of education that we've given
mm,
ourselves, that we've created essentially
yeah.
from nothing, apart from our own intelligence and the wisdom of the land. And then naturally that spirals out to the
Mm,
people, community, place, educators, parents, children, all of that.
mm,
This is not
mm,
a normal thing. I think this is what we're really realizing. It's not a normal thing. And in
no.
us speaking it forth, somehow it brings a little bit of normality into the picture. And this is why I feel so compelled, and I think why we're having so many different things coming our way. And you mentioned about these various global events that are happening, because there's a fundamental truth which you cannot deny. And that is, you've
Mm,
said this many, many times to me before, you cannot bring childhood back. You cannot
mm,
ever, ever, ever bring that back.
mm,
Can you relive that
mm,
as an adult? Can you remember that as an adult? Can you actually move your thick membrane, your concretized way, and all your fears and anxieties and say, it's okay for my child? It's not only just okay for my child to get the
mm,
kapundung berries, but my goodness, how valuable that experience is to generate a genuine love and connection with the earth and people, and the selfless nature of what it is to give somebody
mm,
what that is, and to be able to say, I know from my own experience what it is, and I'll explain it to you how I know, not from how you've
mm,
told me, not from how a
mm,
science teacher has told me. I'll explain it to you in my own words and my own language. And now I'm thinking from a
mm.
3-year-old to a 15-year-old to a 70-year-old to an 80-year-old.
Oh, even to the interns and the youth that comes. But, even as you're talking, I mean, this is just such a beautiful balance, because then I can also sit here and I can say, well, from a scientific perspective,
Mm-hmm.
this is the most crucial part of education for these kids. We need to be rewiring and opening up these neural connections, because the future will be unknown. It will be so unknown. So from a scientific point of view, and building in resilience, building in, open-mindedness, building in that inner compass, building in the courage, building in, that feeling where they can enable themselves. They can't wait for someone else. And this is really interesting within the children and the youth that come here, is that we constantly work on, how are you going to do that? How will this opportunity, how will this environment enable you to do something? So when you do bring the whole scientific brain research into the bigger picture, it gets a whole different tone. Because it's really unfortunate that when you just bring the beauty and the pureness of education and childhood, that people miss that. And then when you bring in the hardcore facts, they kind of say, oh, okay, right? So you have to have that brutality of, well, I'm not actually asking you to do this for your kids. I am telling you that you need to do this. You know, my youngest son went to a birthday party today, and he jumped in the car with his friend, and his friend's window was down. And I said, hey, you know, tomorrow when I see you again, to the friend, you won't be 10 anymore. And they were so upset. They were like, yes, he's gonna be 10. And I said, no, you won't be 10. And Caden, my youngest, he's asked me, how is that possible? And I said, because tomorrow you'll be 10, or your friend will be 10 and 1 day. And the day after he'll be 10 and 2 days. And actually, never ever in your life will you just be 10 again. And it's already 12 o'clock, which means you've already spent half of that in some sort of way. And when we do just stop and think about that, and like, wow, yeah, it's now 8 o'clock in the evening. In 4 hours' time, you won't be 10 ever again. So why would we play with that? You know, the same notion of why would we play with our finite resources and our earth in this way? Like, how has this become something? But I don't want to go into a philosophical discussion now.
I don't feel it's a philosophical discussion, because I mean, this is the reality that you can create. As an educational creator, you can create time. That's essentially what we've done over 3.5 years now. We've created a whole different concept of time, a whole different form of education. Now, are we saying that it is the way for everyone in the world? No, anyone. I'm not in a competition with anyone. In fact, what we're seeing is people coming and saying, hey, how can you complement us? How can you even just help us, because we don't know what to do? And with the infinite ideas that come and the wellspring of ideas, because of the freedom that we have, yes, we have confines, yes, we have constraints, yes, we have challenges and all of that, but because it's not a philosophical conversation, it is an actual reality conversation as to how you can approach education, human relationships, your relationship with nature, to life processes, to creative processes, to products, to communication, to 21st century skills, all of these things through a different understanding, a different feeling, a different experiential feeling of what time is.
You know, when I was younger, and when my kids were way younger, and I can say that now because I'm only moving into that space of my life now where my kids are teenagers, right? I was more open to the flow of other people's opinion about education, and I can sincerely say, after we've started Open Flow and even going through this life process of Open Flow to where I am now, there's such an urgency that I can no longer wait for people to debate this, right? Like it becomes this part of, you need to just hang on and listen. Just stop debating. And debating symbolizes stop talking about this, right? Like actively do something about it. Because also, if you're debating what we're doing, it means you're searching for something. And that means if you stay here and you're not willing to explore what that is here, you will still seek it. So you either need to go find it and go explore and go into, like, you know, the world, or you need to find contentment within this environment and explore what that is for you here. But this is also very strong and more stronger. Why? Because as my kids have grown older, and as I've seen, especially my 15-year-old, there's now return on data. There's now return on living data on how he is responding to this environment, right? There are only 4 children, actually only 3 children left in the learning center that has been here from day one, continuously.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting because it's a very transient, island, and it's a transient nature because it's a progressive education system and people kind of go, and there was COVID in between. But for these kids that have consistently stayed, it is interesting. It is interesting what's showing up. But okay, that kind of leads into my next one. And the next one that I want to see and that I really am passionately wanting to talk and co-create. There are three of these main headings that I'm proposing that are actually not my voice, but I want to enable voices within that. So one is the digital twin, the VR, virtual reality that we're building. The other one is the women's circles for Gian, and the other one is the Kaura community project that Cynthia will be very much involved in.
Awesome.
So those are kind of not my voices, but I feel very compelled to share about this. So another one is this VR digital twin. And this is very interesting because it's being built by my son, 15-year-old, and it is through our learning cycle that's called the Alchemist Garden, and we are literally building a whole environmental alchemist garden game. We're in VR, in virtual reality, which means it's like fully immersive. It is so sensory. It's amazing. But why are we doing this? Yeah.
Can I give a bit of background about that? Because I think it's, or you're going to go into that now?
I wanted to go into that because how I kind of framed it is it came from an impulse, and maybe you can speak into that impulse in a second, because it came from an impulse, and that impulse really like giving credit to the person. I think they'll speak about that now, and what that has done for our whole learning center as a conceptual or as a seed, right? Like that seed fell here in fertile ground, and more than one seed fell, and this particular seed fell within the VR tech space. So it came from an impulse. That impulse moved into an idea. That idea moved into reality, which was conversation, and that reality moved into the virtual reality space, which is a quite interesting process. So can you speak like into the impulse maybe?
So that was initially from a group called the Born Global Foundation, and that's led by Dr. Kimberly Samaha. And the Born Global Foundation has global internships, and the last cohort they had, I believe, was somewhere between 120 to 130 university students, and they take them through various training modules and mentorships in terms of biomimicry, systems thinking, sustainable energy, and various other elements. And I was fortunate to be one of the mentors for that, and got to connect with some of the students, but also get to understand deeper from Dr. Kimberly about what the Alchemist Garden represented. And the latest, because that was evolved from, I think, maybe 2 or 3 internships. And the first internship had been the ideation. The second one was putting it down to a 2D platform and a little bit of marketing type material and the characterizations. And when we went to South Africa, meeting with Emily, who was involved with that second cohort there, and then the third cohort, and meeting Noah in that process, who's part of our community now. and seeing that it's got a little bit flat. And that's kind of where we came into the picture. And really, I have to say, really, you came into the picture. And, 24 hours, 12 hours, 6 hours before PD of the new cycle, everything kind of comes through. And it's really, really such a beautiful, beautiful thing leading to now. So that's a little bit of the backstory and the contextualization of where Alchemist Garden comes from, what that impulse is. There's always something before, isn't there?
This is what I want to say. So how is it that 6 hours before a PD or 3 hours before a professional development, and I mean, I'm not even talking into that now because that's on the other list. But how is it that those ideas can just rush in and stream in? It's because they're coming with an impulse of what came before them. And all of the work and the people and the energy and the thought and the heart and the dedication and the vision and the care and the love, like everything that Dr. Kimberly birthed and what these interns then sustained, that is the impulse. The impulse is the way, right? So as that impulse like rushed and breathed life into the ideas from here, something else was born, right? So it's like our impulse and that impulse. It's like when you see. Have you ever seen in the ocean where two waves meet? Because sometimes they come from two different sides, and it makes this absolutely amazing pattern, and it makes like this. It's super beautiful, but you can't help looking at it and thinking, I don't know what that is, but I can't stop looking at it. And I can't actually explain it.
Yeah, I remember being in the water surfing, and when that happens, when you have the backwash of a wave coming from the shore, and you have a wave that you're currently on, and then what happens to you? What happens to you when you're in the middle of it, and you literally get thrown up into the air, right? And that's that moment of what I believe of open flow being able to do to the very last moment, if you like, with some sort of understanding of responsibilities and team management and curriculum and pedagogy and time. We hold space. We hold that space of being able to allow that flow to come through the opening. Because we are not so confined to saying, okay, this date we need to do this for PD and that for PD, and we'll start there. So we'll pre-plan that in advance. You understand what I mean, right? So what would happen? I become curious what would happen if open flow wasn't open to that. It would go. It would go somewhere else. It would maybe just kind of wither away. And all of that impulse that you mentioned about human activity and thought and intelligence and development and collaboration, all of those things, we don't know what it would have been, but it's a very interesting imagination to go into because we now know what it is evolving or emerging from that impulse where we've united with that.
Well, two things really come up for me from what you've said now. The one is, so there's this constant systems view, right? Because it's not like we're waiting for somebody's impulse to come. Because concurrently with that, we are planning our cycle, and this cycle is called U plus me equals we, which is all about conservation, which was like there was a different impulse born in the professional development. Like the Alchemist Garden came secondary to that, because what was born at Open Flow, the impulse that met that, was when we went into how do we totally define ourselves as new characters within this cycle. So how do we put on new identities, and how do we treat nature as, and that's when the name came. Okay, let's say the Alchemist Garden, right? And as I spoke that into the professional development, that impulse met the other impulse. But then there's something secondary to this. You know, you talk a lot about this recently, where you ask people in different time zones, like, what time is it? And then people in South Africa would now say, well, it's 2:00 in the afternoon. You'll be like, well, it's the same time here. So when I listen to you, talking about, these two impulses, these two waves meet, it is the same wave when you're on the beach. It is the same wave that smashes you in the middle and goes, fuck. It is the same wave that I perceive to gently meet as the energy roll out and just creates a beautiful meeting and a pattern, and then it goes off again. So there's really something within this whole, because it's not a flat thing, right? Within this whole system that you can experience the same impulse, the same meeting of impulses at the same time, just from such a different perspective. And when we shine these lights, and this is equally true to the children, right? And equally true to the educators, and equally true to whoever, why I really want to put this on the symbiotic future, because equally in this creation, somebody would look at this and that impulse will meet their impulse in the same time, right? And it'll be like, oh, I needed to hear this, or oh, I haven't thought about this, or oh, that makes total sense. Because even with what we're doing in the VR, it's not just the VR, it's also in our coding, what we're doing with the kids in coding. We have a coding class with a local educator who is on our team, who is super epic. And he is currently doing a similar approach to bring this whole feeling of nature, conservation, alchemy into game design. Because all of the kids really want to game. And it's really hard to see the options available for children, where it's all like guns and blood and this and that. And still it's like, okay, we're fighting for world peace. But we're not giving kids even that opportunity to have, equity in choosing what it is they want to play or can play. And there's no option for that. It just is what it is in the big world of gaming. And I'm not going to fight that. I'm just going to say, well, you do that, because we're going to continue allowing these kids to be designers, not just consumers of that. And it's really beautiful, because it's giving these kids a platform to say, hey, how does this actually work? Like, what is it when I'm actually, the person designing? One of the educators were saying she really wants to be the person that protects the peace. Like, she wants to keep the peace. And I said, isn't that fascinating? Like, if we were just able to protect peace, we don't have to fight for peace. We don't have to have that on the 17 SDGs. Because if we just protect what is already there, that's a good start. We don't have to like take it away and then try to bring it back. So any case, with the VR, same thing. What is it with the VR and the coding? Like, what are we designing? Why are we designing it? How are we designing it? Who's involved with it? How does this whole, like, I want to be having those threads on the community, just to kind of ground it back to this. So all of these are like sub threads then going into how are we responding to education through a digital medium that still brings in moral compass, that brings in creativity, that brings in communication, that brings in self-directed learning, that brings in, skills and values and attitudes that are so relevant to the children, because they are the clients. They are the actual clients. Parents will always act as if they are the clients because they're paying, but they're not. The kids are the actual clients, and they are the users, right? They are the actual the actual users of the whole system. So that's the VR one, which I think is really interesting. Then secondly, listen to me. Fourthly, we're making progress. I really want to talk, you touched a little bit on it. I want to talk about the Alchemist Garden and how that became a whole framework to guide professional development with our educators. And I want to be talking about how we went through our process of character design and how we brought those character designs into the project integration, and how this can be used as proposal design for workshops, and how we are doing that at the moment. How do we use different profiles to integrate? This is really interesting because every educator builds a profile around them. And then I really want to talk about some of my favorite profile builders, like love, the love languages and the edgewalker profiles, and thinking preferences and personality types. Because as soon as you even do those kind of assessments with educators, they learn something about themselves. They relate to themselves differently, and they know that they're different. They can feel that they're different from each other. But when you start grounding it into some areas where they can kind of like feel into that, they can immerse into that, and they can like rename themselves. And it might sound like, I don't know what Nicolene's talking about. That's fine, because you really need to see it. And this is why I felt so compelled to share this, why it needs to be shared, because it's such a beautiful immersive framework.
Well, I think that's something that we can also dedicate time to actually walk through that, because that becomes somewhat of a framework, somewhat of a model of the things that you're saying. So it's worthwhile being able to walk through that and give some examples and so on too.
Yeah, and it's basically, that thread is professional development for educators. So the first example will be what we did most recently in this cycle number 1 out of the 7 cycles, and then we'll add as we go, because every cycle has different professional development.
Well, these are the sort of things that will go under where the classroom is within the app, right? Within school, because when we have those structured kind of courses, if you like, where people can go through and listen to even a systematic or a sequential kind of movement through what that process is in terms of professional development, that becomes something worthwhile sitting through and looking at and learning. And naturally there would be some sort of resources in there or readings that gives a little bit of a deeper understanding of what's happening there. And for me, that's something that should live under the classroom there. So there's various elements where we can kind of tweak back and forth, but what's really nice is this iterative process.
Well, I was even like number 5, I was really sitting and thinking about, okay, so how would you describe yourself? Would you describe yourself as a modern Montessori? Would you describe yourself as a modern Piaget, a modern Steiner? Like, who are you as a philosopher? Who are you as this person that has dedicated their lives or life to education? And recently, I've been really revisiting some of my older work. I'm talking about a decade and back, and saying, this is really interesting. And I kind of want to speak back into some of those old artifacts, and I want to put it on under its own little tab of, well, this is what I was thinking 10 years ago. This is where my thoughts were 15 years ago. These are photos of things that I was doing back then, and just going into all of these old, kind of like philosophical things about yourself, and really retracing even that in yourself. So I'm really like passionate about doing that, because that helps me also understand how my thinking is evolving. And I believe very strongly that when people see that, they will reawaken that whole remembrance. And that's the beauty of reflection, right?
Well, it is, and that's why I'm so even as you're talking about it, for me that goes under the classroom there, because then you can have your old work there, but you're breathing new life into it again through speaking through these things. But it's just the fact of life, of people's attention spans at the moment, and video content is king. And when you have content, and when you have that auditory visual auditory sharing, there's much more life to that, and then people can go in and look deeper at those things. So when you're able to structure that, because there's also a risk of getting lost in everything else, right? And you want that to be able to to really stand on its own, because what you're mentioning of it being a decade ago, and I mean, you're not that old, and I don't think I'm that old, but when you say a decade, it's like, okay, I was really doing that a decade ago. So now to be able to relive that and reinvigorate that, it's really doing it justice the second time around. So it's not a third time that you think I'll do
Well,
something.
I'm thinking about one of the interns that we currently have here, and I taught that intern as a kindergarten student 18 years ago. So
Mm-hmm.
even thinking about, whoa, there's actually someone at our learning center at the moment who I met for the first time in my life. I didn't know this child existed when he was 5 years old.
Mm.
And 18 years have passed, and I get to see this child again. Then you do stop and think, okay, it's worth recalling and retracing some of those footsteps as a sharing for others.
Yeah.
So moving on, I mean, thank you for pointing out some logistic things. I mean, those are things that I think naturally will iron out in terms of how we communicate it and where it will live. So I'm just going to come back to not as much the logistical part of it, but just kind of like bringing forth some of these ideas. And, we might end up saying, oh, we'll just do one of them, or we'll do all of them, or whatever that is. So number 6 on my list was the Kaura project. And this is something really, really interesting because it deals specifically with community and community projects and community building within industry. And how do you bring education, and make it transdisciplinary? And how do you make education a living, scalable model? Not, when we talk scale, the first thing that comes to mind for people is like global. It has to be like a franchise. It has to be like somewhere big. I don't know. It has to be, I don't know, on the stock market. But scale is also just from one village to the next village. That means, for example, for us, how we do our English program. For us to be able to scale our free local English program to the next village, that is like a global movement. That is a massive movement. And just being able to share that design, the research, the implementation of it, the process, all of that would be so, so beautiful, because it is so purely education without education. It's not in a traditional system. So that was number 6. And
it's not in the past. It's actually an emerging picture. This is a project that we will do. It will happen. It's going to
because
happen.
it's happening, right? Because it's actually happening at the moment. And this is the other thing. Just because the rollout hasn't happened, that's the same with the Alchemist Garden. It is the impulse has already started. The ripple effect is already there. It's already happening. Even sharing this whole process of how that even came about, and sharing like what does this whole thing look like, and why is this happening, is it's important for people, because you're out of your own.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, out of your own natural intelligence, you'll be like, I can do that in my community. That makes total sense.
Exactly.
And it's all about the sense making.
I don't know what the word is yet, because it's not hope, right? It's not hope, because there's not that much despair in I don't think there's that much despair when we're talking about right now, where people, it's more like, what is the word? It's more like the spark, or the catalyst, or the disruption. It's the disruption that it gives people, that they go, oh, that's really cool. That's interesting. I can do that within my class. I can do that within this group. It really is that, because so often we're met with this stale picture of A, B, C, 1, 2, 3, rows and columns, portfolio, report, this is what's happening. But this is a living, breathing system of a very, very different way of approaching education. And naturally, within that dialogue process, to be able to talk through those things gives not even a vulnerability. It's just the truth. It's just the truth of what's happening. And there's a certain exuberance that you feel when you get swept up into that dialogue and that conversation. And I'm understanding more and more as we go along of how how extraordinary it is what we're doing, and how extraordinary I am. And I say that because I used to look at this poster on my wall when I used to stay in Australia and sleep in the same room as my brother and share a room. And it was about a movie. I can't remember what it was, but I always looked at this word extraordinary, and I was so fascinated by it. I remember looking at it like every single night, and it never made sense to me because in the movie, which I never ever saw, I don't even know what movie it was. It was like an old film poster because some people gave it to us from the video shop down the road. And I think it was used to like cover up a hole on the wall or something. But it like showed this someone being carried like, oh, someone was extraordinary. But I'm looking at going, well, actually, it says extraordinary. It's just ordinary. It's extraordinary. But somehow that means it's something beyond ordinary.
Well,
And that's
it
why
can mean
I
that.
realize with open flow and what it is that we're doing and talking through and speaking through these projects, it is extraordinary. It's extraordinary. It's abnormal. It's so extraordinary and abnormal, it's become ordinary and normal for us to be able to speak like this and to be able to share with people, for them to feel what that is and not attach it to us, but attach it to the whole movement and all of our amazing team and all of the amazing industry partners who say, you know what, I also feel that too. I want to kind of come through and unite with you guys and what you kind of stand for, what you embody, because I don't know. People are saying, I don't know. Let's try. And I'm like, that's so cool because we're in the same boat now.
So when I look at extraordinary, and if I think about we're just all ordinary.
Yeah.
And when you add that little bit of extra, whether it's like 1%, 100%, 10%, you are extraordinary. So it's all about having the courage to take that little bit of extra. And that extra doesn't have to be a whole mountain. It can just be one thing. It can even be an attitude. It can even be like the willingness to say, I'm just going to be communicating to my parents one newsletter per month in a different way. I'm going to add a voice note to it. I'm going to add a QR code to it. That one thing, which is not even a percentage, right? That's like a 0.0. That already makes you extraordinary. But you need, like you're saying, something to disrupt that and then to catalyze that. But I'm also thinking it's not really the disruption that brings the change. It is when you, from that disruption, allow yourself permission to act on it. Because you can constantly be disrupted. And I think a lot of us do experience that. And I think even if you're working in government schools, or if you're working in any organization, it is safe to say that there will be daily disruptions, whether it's like working with people or like finances, but then giving yourself permission to do something about that, like acting on it, that is the real change. That is the real gap currently in the world. And also when you look at the IDGs, you know, the pillar number 5 is all about how do you enable change? How do you do that? And I mean, this is a global survey, how that framework was built. So there's something within a global understanding that people lack that permission, they lack those skills, they lack that inner ability to say, I can change. And one thing that falls under that category is courage. And another one that falls under that category is creativity, which is really, really interesting. So if you build up some courage to do something creative, you've already enabled change. So if you do that, and if you look at what we've done in that fashion through Kaura, through community, through industry, it becomes really interesting. So that's going to make me jump to something else that's related, because it's really just all of a systems view, is our internships. And I really want to talk into that, because we've had quite an amazing amount of internships, very intensive internships come through in various ways. And I really think it's important to speak to that and to talk people through what that is, you know, the opportunities that these internships enable within people, what these the challenges are of having these internships, whether it's like financially, whether it's capacity, whether it's like from stakeholders, whether it's from like the university perspective, whether it's like just talking into those challenges, talking into like the progression, how it progressed over time, the intentions of why we allow the internships and the intentions of interns coming. It's really beautiful, even listening to stakeholders like the universities as to why, you know, and then also listening to the government as to how have they enabled these internships through Campus Merdeka to happen. It's interesting. Like the value, the reflections, like there's some really beautiful interviews that we can share that these, you know, interns spoke, and they're so rich when you listen to young people and you put on, it's almost like you have to put on these socks of empathy and saying like, whoa, that's what it was for you. I can't even imagine that. And thinking about, you know, alternative finance designs and like sponsorships and like the critical learnings, you know, the parent interviews, those magical moments, like just talking really directly into the internships and what that has been at a youth level, because there's so much that can be scaled for people in those spaces. And our internships are beautiful indicators for middle school and high school designers as well, because there's something very real and relevant in the youth, you know. Okay, then going into something super quick, which is Afrikaans. So my native language is not English. I always make it very clear that I went to university for the first time and I was like, I can't believe so many people can speak English at the same time in one place. So my mother tongue is Afrikaans, and I grew up in South Africa. And when I think of my own heritage and I think of my own, you know, responsibility to place, doesn't mean I have to be in the place physically, but how can I bring, you know, how can I bring some of this back as servitude to other educators in South Africa through language? Because I can do that. I can access something within that community of educators. So through this whole community and the diversity of language, I want to do that.
Nice.
Okay, number 9, almost there. I really want to talk a little bit into products and ideas. So having a specific place, and I know you'll see this fit very well with under the classroom. So in terms of resources, in terms of like examples of training models, examples of you know, thought products, design thinking tools, systems thinking tools, just all of these practical. So this is like the stuff that you can pick up, like this pen, that you can like really hold in your hand, like you can like work with it, like something you can say, I can try this, I can test this, like I can whatever with it. So that's really something that I think can be valuable. And then if I go into number 10 is my big baby at the moment. Number 10 is like, I don't know. I really, really bring this one to the community from a place of, I need perspective. I need help. I need insight. I need dialogue. I need conversation. I bring this as my offering, asking for community in return. And this, I won't get into it too much because this is more of a potent discussion and a potent sharing around patterns and pattern design and the game of life and ideation and testing that and going into deeper dialogue through a scientific method. So that's number 10 for me. I'm just going to skip over that one, but that one is really something that's really, really, really present for me, and I'm excited to bring that as a personal kind of discussion to the group. Then number 11, I really think it'll be so cool to kind of backtrack and get onto or get up to speed with the rhythm of talks, conversations, conferences. You know, we've been to South Africa, we've been to Dubai, we've had all of these online sessions. There's like so much coming up now in September and October, and kind of highlights what's happening. And even when things do come up, like for example, the World Environmental Conference, Education Conference, like the closing for applications or for proposals are next week, the 31st. So having that as a place where if something comes up, it's like, hey, check this out. We either have been there, we either are there, or this is something that's coming up. Like, hey guys, like look at what's happening, and maybe it's of interest. Because I just do believe it is so valuable when there's like free offerings and spaces and just like that abundance of sharing of what comes our way. I'm really excited about that. And then the last one is really on behalf of a very special, beautiful, wild woman, and that's Gian. And I know Gian's also in the community. And I mean, she recently received a grant through the Women's Earth Alliance to start off some projects for women, with women, and build capacity within women at a local, from a local perspective. So just looking at what that, from an Indonesian perspective, but I kind of see this as the womb space, as the space of safety, as the space of self-worth, as a space of, okay, this project is very, very specific for women and what that is to be a woman. And I know especially like people like Tina, people like Maya that are, off the top of my head, even people like Natalie who are in our group, that all hold their own identities and, working with women and as women in business, in education, in like the spiritual world. Like, what does that mean? And kind of like drawing on this collective knowledge to support something like this on the ground.
Awesome.
So yeah, that was the last one. That was kind of like just coming back to a big list of just inner passion at the moment, inner fire.
Nice. I love it, because then that also gives us the roadmap. Say roadmap because there's various junctures and there's various spots, and there's, what do you call it in South Africa when there's like a
stop, an intersection, crossroad, a four-way stop.
No, you call lights, what do you call them? Robots.
A robot.
Like the traffic lights.
Yeah, stop at the robot. Stop at the robot.
Yeah, it's a traffic light. Anyway, the robot. It's the various roadmap with robots and lights and everything that gives us, we get into this rhythm. Or, as I always say, we set the routine. We set the routine brings the rhythm. And the routine there is a structured way that we can also hold conversations, and we can put some time parameters around that and say, okay, let's go at this, let's go at this, let's go at this. Then they all kind of have their pathways and their alignments, and that's part of a systems thinking or a greater systems approach of looking at these things. And though it may look like everything is kind of happening in segregation at the moment, with a little bit more time, we will see this greater weaving come together. It's a very conscious, deep weaving with every single person. All the things that you're saying are exactly that. Those 12 different elements, if you like, are really concurrently living and breathing with one another. So
Mm.
the fact that you can kind of distill those one is really such a phenomenal quality about yourself, but then being able to really structure that so it's coherent for community
Mm.
to be able to grab whatever threads that they want and what they will out of being able to have that documented in video and that can.
I want to show you. Come. This is our puppy,
Oh,
our open flow puppy. Look at.
do they have the blue? What's happening with the blue tongue?
Look at.
Oh, what's it eating? Okay, I think we
Buiten,
better go
buiten.
check.
So I actually want to say something about Kent.
Yeah.
When we first got Kent, he was so small we could carry him in our arms, and maybe in a traditional sense, people will have like emotional companions, and it will be like smooth sailing. And Kent was a little bit crazy, but so many of our kids here at the learning center has never. He ate the ink. That's what's happened on his tongue. So many
Oh,
kids here at the learning center has
what?
they don't have they don't have pets, or they might not have dogs, right? And when you see, and this is what I want to show under I want to show this under the daily open flow is how these kids run and play, find companionship, find friendship, find oneness, find communication, find exchange, find play, find like, bartering. Like there's the, he might do something like this, right? And that might evoke all sorts of emotions, thinking, blame, anger. But then when you go to just that behavior systemically, what is he actually saying? He's saying, hi. He's saying, are you seeing me? He's saying, I just want to spend time. He is saying, I'm still a baby. I'm still a puppy. I want to explore. I want to do. So there's something through him that allows us to kind of detach from children's behavior in the same way and say, well, they do the same. He's whenever I want to take that thing out of his mouth, he doesn't want me to do that. So, got it. Yeah, so there's
Okay.
something really beautiful in the whole design. And I think, once we set up all of these bits and pieces, it'll be such a really beautiful, rich flow. It's an ecosystem. Like we're really breathing and bringing an ecosystem and the diversity to life. And if anything that's going to save this world, it's going to be the diversity, the biodiversity. And if we're saying that we're designing a living systems view, it means all the components metabolize and all the components are living, and therefore it is the biodiversity of our educational system that will sustain life for education.
Yeah.
That's kind of all from me.
Okay.
This was
Cool.
so cool. Thank you so much.
No, you're welcome, and thank you also. I think even within a single system, if you have an abundance of diversity, then you have a very, very interesting single system in its own. And what that can do for the neural network of activity, what that does as a node of generative diversity within itself, automatically kind of spins out all of these offshoots, and that's what I really experience as what this conversation represents, that these 12 different elements with various different subcategories and the divergence that's happened in conversation is all really from the one source that's kind of spinning out, and these offshoots are coming. And
Well,
I think we're kind of with other elements too.
if you do the math right, like, so if we have 12 components times 32 people, what is that?
Yep.
So if we had these 12 nodes kind of like offshoot out of Symbiotic Future, and it happens to 32 people, what is that? Like, how many nodes
It's
would that?
380.
Okay, so even if you go half of that,
Mm-hmm.
it's really, really interesting.
So, okay, let's go a little bit deeper into this before we finish up then. So that's 192. But then from the simplistic design perspective, because anything complex must be brought down to the most simplistic form so that you have the most inclusivity, right? So that's where the UX and why UX and UI, so user experience and user interface, Kent's really doing interesting work there with
Well,
you.
he's like bringing me all these. He's literally bringing me all of these things. He goes over to the shelf. He's a golden retriever. They like super intellectual. So he goes over, he fetches it, and then he brings it to me. So I'm just acknowledging it. Thanks, Kent, but no thanks.
I just want to say that you have to bring it down to its most simplistic form for people to engage with it. And that's what the beauty of this school app is. And we'll see in the compounded diversity on the back end side of things that the front end side of things is very simplistic and it's very user friendly, which then when you go into that, the natural divergent thinking of our intelligence is able to follow that path of multiple different streams, 12 different categories, 192 things multiplied by 2 is 384.
Yeah, and this is only with 32 people. Just bring what is really alive within you, and there has to be
That's
something.
really it. Yeah, it's simplicity in being, one of the 4 pillars of open flow. Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much. I'm gonna go now. I'm gonna go give Ken some water. I'm sure he needs to get rid of this green tongue. And just thank you, Peter, for like breathing the life into Symbiotic Future. It's really, really so epic. So yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Thanks for saying thanks. Cool. Okay. See you next time.
Okay. Ciao.